3 days before my retirement party, I walked into the Hartwell Insurance office on Maple Street to pick up the final paperwork. I'd been coming to this building for 31 years. I knew every receptionist by name, every scratch on the lobby floor. That morning, the woman at the front desk, Carol, pulled me aside before I could reach the elevator. She grabbed my wrist, not my arm, my wrist, like she was checking my pulse. "Alice," she whispered, "don't go up yet." I laughed. "Carol, I just need to sign the pension transfer forms. It'll take 5 minutes." She wasn't smiling. "Your son is upstairs. He's been in Mr. Hargrove's office for 40 minutes. My son, Oliver. Who told me last week he had a conference in Seattle? "Just wait," Carol said. "Please, wait here." I don't know why I listened to her. Maybe because she was holding my wrist and her hand was shaking. I sat in one of the lobby chairs, the stiff ones nobody ever sits in, and I waited. Carol went back to her desk. She kept her eyes on the elevator. 12 minutes later, Oliver walked out. He was with a man I didn't recognize. Mid-40s, navy suit briefcase. They were laughing. Oliver clapped the man on the shoulder like they were old friends. They walked past the front desk without stopping. Oliver never looked toward me. He never knew I was there. Carol came over the moment the glass door closed behind them. "That man," she said carefully, "has been here 3 times this month. Always asking about your pension accounts. Always with Oliver." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not panic. Something quieter than that. I asked her his name. She slid a business card across the desk. Preston Valk. Valk Financial Partners. Estate Restructuring and Asset Transition Services. I picked up the card. I thanked her. I walked out to my car and sat there for a long time without starting the engine. My name is Alice Beaumont. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as Senior Compliance Officer at Hartwell Insurance. I know what Asset Transition Services means when someone is saying it about a living person's money. It means they're planning to move it, and they're planning to do it without asking. I want to tell you about the 4 days that changed everything I thought I knew about my family. My husband Robert died 7 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, fast and brutal. We had 9 months from diagnosis to the end. He was 61. We've been married 38 years, built everything together. The house on Clover Ridge, the retirement accounts, the investment portfolio we'd spent decades carefully tending. When he died, I inherited all of it. We'd written the documents together, signed them together, updated them every 5 years like responsible adults. After Robert died, I kept working, not because I needed to, because I needed to be somewhere every morning that expected something of me. Oliver was 34 when his father passed. He was an estate attorney in Charlotte, successful, well-regarded. He flew home for the funeral and cried at the graveside. He called every Sunday for the first year. He told me I was strong. He told me I was an inspiration. He told me I was an inspiration. He told me Dad would be so proud. He also told me, gently, over many months, that maybe I should think about simplifying my finances, that managing a portfolio was a lot for one person, that he could help. I told him I was fine. I'd been managing our finances for years. Robert trusted me with it completely, but Oliver kept circling back. Slowly, the way water wears down stone. In January, he started mentioning a financial advisor he trusted, someone who specialized in helping people at my stage of life. In March, he flew in for a weekend and spent most of it at my desk, going through my accounts with me. He said he was just checking, making sure everything was in order. He pointed out fees I was paying. He suggested a different fund structure. He mentioned a trust. In April, he introduced me to Preston Valk over dinner. Charming man. Asked about Robert, about our history together, about what I envisioned for my later years. I thought it was a pleasant conversation. I didn't realize it was an intake interview. Looking back, I can see every step. I just didn't see them while they were happening. I sat in that parking lot outside Hartwell for 20 minutes. Then I called my oldest friend, Bea Channing. I've known Bea since we were 22. She's sharp as anyone I've ever met, retired federal accountant, and she does not sugarcoat anything for anyone. I told her what Carol had said, about Preston Volk, about Oliver, about the visits I didn't know about. Bea was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Alice, what does your pension transfer form actually say?" I hadn't read it. I'd trusted Oliver when he told me it was standard documentation for the retirement transition. He'd offered to handle the paperwork. I'd been grateful. "Don't sign anything," Bea said. "Not one page." I'm driving over. Bea arrived at my house at 4 that afternoon with her reading glasses and a legal pad. We sat at the kitchen table with the pension transfer documents Oliver had emailed me 2 weeks earlier. I pulled them up on my laptop. We read every page. On page 9, buried in a section titled Beneficiary Coordination and Successor Authority, was a clause I had not noticed. In the event that the primary account holder elects consolidated asset management, all accounts including pension disbursements, investment portfolios, and secondary real estate holdings shall transfer administrative authority to the designated successor trustee. The designated successor trustee was Oliver Beaumont. There was no clause for my consent after signing. There was no sunset provision. There was no mechanism for me to reclaim authority without his written agreement. Bea set down her glasses. "This isn't a pension transfer form," she said. "This is a power of attorney over everything you own, dressed up in retirement language." My hands were steady. My mind was very quiet. How long would it take to execute? If you signed this Saturday at the party and he filed it Monday morning, you'd lose administrative control of every account by Wednesday. I closed the laptop. I want you to understand something about the silence that followed. It wasn't grief. It wasn't even anger. It was the particular feeling of looking at something you've been told is one thing and realizing it is something else entirely. The way you might look at a photograph of someone you loved and understand, suddenly, that you never really knew their face. My son, my Oliver, who cried at his father's grave. The retirement party was Saturday, 3 days away. That evening, I called a woman named Harriet Cole. I'd worked with Harriet's husband in the early 2000s before he retired. Harriet was a civil litigation attorney who specialized in elder financial law. I hadn't spoken to her in 4 years. When I explained what I was looking at, she asked me to send the documents immediately. She called back in 40 minutes. "Alice, this is carefully constructed. Whoever drafted this knew exactly what they were doing. The language is designed to look like standard succession planning. But there's nothing standard about it. Can we stop it? If you don't sign it Saturday, yes. But I want to know what else is already in motion. Has Oliver had access to any of your accounts?" I thought about March, about the weekend he spent at my desk. He had sat at my computer for a full afternoon. He'd said he was checking my portfolio fees. I'd made coffee and let him work. I called my bank that night, the investment brokerage the next morning. What I found made Harriet go very quiet when I told her. Between March and May, there had been 6 advisory inquiries on my accounts, not withdrawals, inquiries, the kind made when someone is assessing total assets before a transfer. Each one authorized with my login credentials. Credentials Oliver would have seen when he sat at my desk. Oliver hadn't stolen anything yet. He was waiting for Saturday. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the bedroom Robert and I had shared for 30 years and stared at the ceiling and tried to understand when this had started, not the plan. I knew when the plan started. I was trying to understand when my son had decided I was something to be managed rather than someone to be loved. I thought about last Thanksgiving. Oliver had flown in with his girlfriend Sophie, a quiet woman who worked in finance and said very little at dinner. Oliver had spent most of the trip asking questions about my intentions for the house, not concerned questions. Assessment questions. What did I plan to do with it long term? Had I thought about the maintenance burden? Wouldn't it make more sense to simplify at some point? I told him I loved the house, that I intended to stay, that the house was mine. He'd smiled. Of course, Mom. But the questions kept coming, differently shaped each time. Softer, more casual, like he was just making conversation. He was building a case, building a record of my apparent difficulty managing a large estate alone. I could see it now, laid out in front of me like a blueprint. The next morning, I drove to Harriet's office. Bea came with me. We sat across from Harriet for 2 hours while she mapped out what we were looking at. Oliver's plan, as best she could reconstruct it, had 3 stages. First, establish a narrative of my declining capacity to manage complex assets. The questions, the gentle suggestions, the offers to help, all of it designed to create a record. Second, position Preston Volk as a trusted financial advisor, get him embedded in my accounts. Third, use the pension transfer documents to execute the authority transfer on Saturday, file on Monday, and have full administrative control by Wednesday. What's the timeline pressure? I asked. Your retirement benefits activate the week after the party, Harriet said. Once they're in payout phase, they're significantly harder to redirect. He needs them to transfer before that window closes, so I had a deadline too. Harriet leaned forward. There's something else I need to tell you. I looked up Preston Volk. She slid a printed page across the desk. Preston Volk had been named in a civil complaint in 2019, an elderly widow in Asheville. Her daughter had caught the discrepancy in her mother's accounts 4 months after a retirement restructuring. By then, $340,000 had been moved into a management trust controlled by Volk's firm. The daughter fought for 2 years. She recovered most of it. Volk's firm paid a settlement and he lost his certified financial planner designation in North Carolina. He still operated in South Carolina under a slightly restructured firm name. Volk Financial Partners instead of Volk Financial Partners instead of Volk Financial Partners. I looked at the page. I thought about the woman in Asheville. I thought about her daughter, fighting for 2 years. I thought about what it would feel like to spend 2 years fighting your own son. Here is something I want to say plainly. I loved Oliver. Not in the past tense yet. Even then, I loved him the way you love someone you raised. Someone who carries your husband's eyes and your mother's stubborn jaw. I loved him with the particular helpless love that parents carry and never quite put down. And that love sat in my chest like a stone the entire drive home. I spent Thursday making phone calls. Harriet had a contact, a forensic accountant named James Whitfield who worked financial fraud cases. He'd helped Harriet's clients before. Bea reached out to him directly. He met us at my house Thursday afternoon, sat at the kitchen table in a flannel shirt, and listened without interrupting while I talked. When I finished, he opened his laptop and asked for my account credentials. Walk me through March, he said. Everything you remember about that weekend, I told him. He pulled up the inquiry logs. He cross-referenced them with a calendar he built from the information I gave him. 3 hours later, he closed the laptop and looked at me with steady eyes. He didn't just look at your accounts, James said. He created an Access profile. There's a linked advisory account I want you to look at. He turned the laptop toward me. A brokerage account I didn't recognize. Opened in February. The account holder was listed as Beaumont Estate Planning Trust. I had never created that account. It's dormant right now, James said. It's a vessel. Once you sign Saturday and the authority transfers, your existing accounts can be rolled into this trust in a single transaction. He could complete the full transfer in under 20 minutes. Bea sat very still. I looked at the screen for a long time. How much are we talking about? Harriet asked. James pulled up a summary. The house on Clover Ridge, appraised at $820,000. The retirement portfolio, $1.4 million. The pension and payout phase, approximately $4,200 per month for the rest of my life. The secondary investment account Robert and I had maintained since 1998, total, just over $2.3 million. That's what Oliver and Preston Volk had decided I was worth. And it was also exactly what they'd decided I no longer needed to control myself. I didn't cry. I'd expected to, and I didn't. I just felt very tired and very clear-headed, and I thought about Robert saying to me once, years ago, that the thing about trust is that you can't half give it. You either trust someone or you don't, and pretending otherwise is a slow kind of damage. I trusted my son. I trusted him completely. That night, I sat at Robert's old desk, and I talked to him the way I do sometimes when the house is very quiet. I told him what was happening. I told him I didn't know where Oliver had gone, the boy who used to sleep with his stuffed rabbit until he was 8 and cried when we had to put the dog down. I told him I was going to fight. I think he would have wanted me to. Friday was about preparation. Harriet filed a preliminary injunction to freeze the dormant trust account, sealed, not executable until Saturday evening. James compiled his forensic documentation into a formal report. Bea drove to the county recorder's office and pulled the property records on the house, just to make sure nothing had been filed there. Nothing had. He'd been waiting for Saturday. I also needed to understand one thing I still didn't know. Sophie, Oliver's girlfriend. Was she a participant, or was she, like me, someone who was being managed? James found the answer in the brokerage records. Sophie's name appeared nowhere. No ownership stake in the dormant trust. No advisory access. Oliver had not included her, which meant either she didn't know or he didn't trust her with it. I found that interesting and sad in a way I couldn't quite name. The retirement party was hosted by Hartwell Insurance at the Lakeview Club. 42 years of colleagues, 3 decades of relationships, people who'd watched me come in every morning and had no idea what was happening in the margins of my life. I wore the blue dress Robert bought me for our 30th anniversary. I figured if I was going to walk into something, I'd walk into it wearing something he loved. Oliver arrived at 6 with Sophie. He hugged me at the door. He smelled like the same cologne he'd worn since he was 25. He told me I looked beautiful. He meant it, I think. People can mean the things they say while still doing what they're doing. Preston Valk arrived at 6:15. Oliver introduced him to 3 of my former colleagues as my financial advisor. I watched him work the room. He was good at it. Warm, unhurried, the kind of man who makes you feel like you're the most interesting person he's encountered in years. Carol from the lobby was there. She caught my eye across the room and gave me a small nod. James Whitfield was there too. He'd come as Bea's guest. He stood near the bar and didn't look like a forensic accountant. He looked like someone's quiet uncle. Harriet was at table 6 with her husband. The evening moved the way these evenings do. Speeches, applause, a slideshow of photographs from across my career. My department head said I'd raised the compliance standard for the entire firm. My assistant of 12 years cried a little. Oliver sat at the head table and smiled. At 8 o'clock, the MC invited me to say a few words. I stood at the podium with the speech I'd written on a note card. I set the note card down. I didn't look at it. I started where I always start when I have something real to say, with the truth. 31 years is a long time, I said. Long enough to learn that the most important part of any job, any relationship, any institution, is the question of who you trust and why. The room was warm and attentive. Oliver was watching me with the particular expression he has when he's proud of me. I know that expression. I have photographed it at graduations and holidays and ordinary Sundays. I trusted this institution, I said. I trusted my colleagues. I trusted the people I built a life with. I paused. I also learned, this week, that trust is something that can be constructed to look like love, something that can be engineered. Oliver's expression shifted. Just slightly. Not yet alarm, just attention. I looked at him directly. I learned that someone can spend months building a case, quietly, carefully, that a woman of my age, of my experience, is no longer fully capable of managing what she built. They can do it in questions, in suggestions, in offers of help that aren't help. The room had gone very quiet. I found documents this week, I said, that would have transferred administrative control of my entire estate, $2.3 million, my home, my pension, everything Robert and I built together, to another person's authority, without my informed consent. dressed up to look like routine retirement paperwork. Someone in the back said, "Oh my God," very quietly. Oliver stood up. "Mom, sit down, Oliver." My voice was level. He stared at me. He sat. The documents were prepared with the assistance of a financial advisor. I looked at Preston Volk. He had gone very still. A man who has done this before. In Asheville, North Carolina in 2019, a retired school teacher named June Harmon nearly lost $340,000 to the same strategy. Her daughter caught it. It took 2 years and a civil lawsuit to recover the money. Mr. Volk's firm settled and he restructured under a new name. Volk pushed back his chair. James Whitfield moved from the bar to the door before Volk reached it. "Please don't," James said pleasantly. "There are people who'd like to speak with you." I turned back to the room. 3 of my colleagues from the compliance division were watching me with expressions I recognized. The expression of people who understand what they're looking at. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy," I said. "I'm telling you this because I've spent 31 years in compliance, and I know that fraud survives in silence. It survives when people assume that someone else will notice, someone else will say something, someone else will step forward." Carol was at table 4, her hands clasped in front of her. She held my gaze and didn't look away. "This week," I said. "Carol Jennings sat in the lobby of this building and waited for me. She could have looked the other way. She could have told herself it wasn't her business. She held my wrist in the lobby and told me to wait." I looked at her. "Carol, thank you." Carol pressed her fingers to her lips. Her eyes were bright. I looked back at Oliver. He was pale now. Sophie had her hand on his arm and was saying something low and urgent into his ear. Whatever it was, he wasn't moving. "The injunction filed this morning," I said, "freezes the dormant account Mr. Volk created in February, the account that was waiting for my signature on Saturday's paperwork." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the pension transfer documents. "I won't be signing these." I set them on the podium. "The authority transfer cannot execute. The accounts are frozen. What happens next is a matter for attorneys and, very possibly, law enforcement." A man near the back stood. Retired colleague, 28 years with the firm, the most methodical person I'd ever worked with. "Alice," he said, "the compliance division stands with you, whatever you need." 3 more people stood. Oliver stood too, but differently. He looked at me the way you look at someone when the person you thought they were and the person they actually are collapse into a single image, and you can't hold both at once. "Mom," he said. His voice cracked. "I can explain. I know you can." I looked at my son, this man with Robert's eyes and my mother's stubborn jaw. But not tonight. 2 officers stepped inside. One approached Preston Volk, who had stopped trying to leave when James positioned himself at the door. The other stood near Oliver. Volk was escorted out quietly. He didn't speak. He had the particular silence of someone who has calculated and found that speaking is worse than not speaking. Oliver was not arrested that night. There was a conversation, lengthy and quiet, with the officers and with Harriet. He left the party without speaking to me again. Sophie stayed. She sat at her table alone after Oliver went, staring at the tablecloth, and I thought about what I'd said earlier, that Oliver hadn't included her in the account, that he hadn't trusted her. Maybe she'd been managed too. I went to her at 9:30. She looked up when I approached and her eyes were red. She said, "I didn't know." "I believe you," I said. She said, "I should have seen. He was careful," I said. "These things are designed to be invisible until they aren't." She nodded. She looked very young. She asked if there was anything she could do. I told her to take care of herself first. That was enough. Bea found me after the officers left and put both arms around me and didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "Robert would have thought you were absolutely magnificent." I laughed. First time all week. It surprised me. We gathered at my house at 11. Harriet, Bea, James, Carol. We sat in the kitchen, the same table where Bea and I had read the documents 2 days before. James walked us through the full financial picture. The frozen account would be reviewed by the State Financial Crimes Unit. Volk's prior civil case in Asheville would be entered into the record. The inquiry logs on my accounts would be presented as evidence of intent. Oliver, Harriet told me, was a more complicated question. He had not yet made any unauthorized transfers. He had authorized inquiries on accounts he had access to through my disclosed credentials. Whether that constituted fraud would depend on what else the investigation uncovered. "What do you want to do?" Harriet asked me. I thought about it for a long time. "I want the investigation to go where it goes," I said. "I'm not going to soften that, but I'm also not going to add anything to it that isn't there." James nodded. "That's the right call." At midnight, Carol stood to go and hugged me at the door. "I'm sorry I didn't call you sooner," she said. "When I first saw him come in with that man, I thought, well, I told myself it wasn't my business." "What changed your mind?" She thought about it. "I kept thinking about the third visit," she said. "He came in on a Tuesday and he was carrying folders. He walked past reception without signing in. He just walked past like it was already his building." She looked at me. That's when I knew. I held her hand for a moment. "Thank you for not letting it stay, not your business." I didn't sleep that night either. I lay in the bedroom and listened to the house settle the way it does in summer, and I thought about Oliver at 8 years old, sitting on the back porch the day after his dog died, absolutely still, refusing to cry in front of anyone but me. I thought about Robert calling him our quiet one, the one who holds everything inside. I thought about what it feels like to want to matter so much that you take things, and I thought about the fact that that wasn't an explanation. It was a fact alongside another fact, that he had looked at everything Robert and I built together and decided it was his to move. 6 months. Preston Volk's case went to the State Financial Crimes Unit and eventually to federal prosecutors because the Asheville case crossed state lines and June Harmon's daughter had never stopped looking for other victims. 3 more came forward after local news coverage of my case. Women in their 60s and 70s. Retired educators, a pharmacist, a woman who'd run a small bookkeeping firm. All of them had been approached through the same channel. All of them had been positioned as too old to manage what they had. Volk pled guilty in October. Restitution, 5 years. His attorney called it an isolated pattern. No such thing. Oliver, my son. He was not criminally charged. The investigation determined that he had not personally profited from the dormant account and had not made any unauthorized transfers. He had facilitated access for Volk and had signed documents on Volk's behalf that he claimed he did not understand the full implication of. His attorney, not the estate attorney he'd been, but a different one, someone who had to look his mother in the eye on his behalf, presented it as misguided deference to a trusted financial advisor. I don't know whether I believe that. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, the way truth usually is. Oliver resigned from his firm in August. He moved back to Charlotte, to a smaller apartment, and he started seeing a therapist. I know this because he told me, not in a phone call, in a letter. It was 6 pages, handwritten. He told me he had watched me work my entire life and somewhere along the way had stopped seeing the work and started seeing the outcome. The accounts? The house. The number. He said he'd told himself that he was helping me, that I was getting older, that I would need help eventually, that he was just getting ahead of it. He said he knew that wasn't why. He said knowing it and understanding it were 2 different things, and he was trying to understand it. He said in the second to last page, "I think I wanted to inherit you, not after you are gone. Now, while you're here, I wanted to matter to you the way the company mattered, the way the accounts mattered, the way keeping everything safe mattered, the way keeping everything safe mattered. I told myself I was protecting you. I was really just trying to make you need me." I read that 3 times. Then I sat at Robert's desk and cried. For the first time, a good long cry, the kind you owe yourself after a week like that one. My response to Oliver was 2 pages. I told him that I heard him. I told him that wasn't an excuse, and he already knew that. I told him that his father and I had poured everything into building a legacy, and that somewhere in that pouring, I had probably taught him that the legacy was what mattered most. I said maybe that was my failure too. I said I wasn't ready to forgive him. Not yet, but I wasn't ready to let go of him either. I said, you are not your worst decision, but you don't get to walk away from it. You walk through it. Morrison Consulting. I met my firm, Hartwell Insurance, continued without interruption. Carol Jennings was promoted to office manager in September. She accepted it in the same quiet, practical way she does everything. We have lunch on the second Tuesday of every month. James Whitfield sent me a Christmas card. So did June Harmon's daughter in Asheville. She wrote, "What you did helped us close what we couldn't close. Thank you." In November, I sat in the sunroom with Bea, and we drank coffee and didn't talk about any of it for 2 whole hours. We talked about her grandchildren, about a book she was reading, about a trip she was considering to Portugal. It was the most normal 2 hours I'd had since June. At some point, she looked at me and said, "How are you?" Actually, I thought about it. "I'm tired," I said. "And I'm okay. And I miss Robert." She nodded. "Those can all be true at the same time." "Yes," I said, "they can." Oliver called in December. Not a letter, a call. He asked if he could visit at Christmas. I told him I needed more time. He said he understood and he'd wait. I don't know what we will be to each other. I know that I love him, and that love does not resolve everything, does not cancel what happened, does not make the blueprint I found on page 9 disappear. I know that some things you rebuild slowly, if at all, one careful conversation at a time. On the 1st of January, I sat in the sunroom with a cup of coffee and the morning light coming through the windows, and I thought about the woman who had walked into Hartwell Insurance 3 days before her retirement party to pick up paperwork. She'd sat in a lobby chair, the stiff kind nobody uses, and waited because a woman she knew held her wrist and said, "Please." I thought about what would have happened if Carol had looked the other way. The house is mine. The accounts are mine. The pension that Robert and I planned for 30 years is mine. I am 63 years old and I have 31 years of compliance experience, and I will tell you this without any uncertainty. The most sophisticated fraud is always the one wearing the face of someone who loves you. It counts on your love making you careless. It counts on your trust making you slow. Don't be slow. If someone is asking questions that feel like assessments, they probably are. If paperwork arrives described as routine when you haven't asked for it, read every page. If the people who love you are talking about your needs in rooms you weren't invited into, you deserve to be in that room. And if someone in a lobby grabs your wrist and says, "Wait, there's one more thing." In February, I got a text from an unknown number. I almost didn't open it. It was from Sophie. She said, "I want you to know I've been thinking about what you said at the party, that these things are designed to be invisible." I should have asked more questions. I should have pushed back when things didn't feel right. I didn't because I told myself it wasn't my place. "I'm sorry. I hope you're well." I wrote back. I said, "It was designed to be invisible to you two. You're not at fault. Take care of yourself. I mean that." She wrote, "Thank you. I hope Oliver finds his way." I looked at that for a moment. Then I wrote, "So do I." Because here is the thing that I have learned. At 63, after 31 years in compliance and 7 years without Robert, and 1 very long week in June, you can hold the truth of what someone did alongside the hope of who they might yet become. Those 2 things do not cancel each other out. They simply live in you at the same time, which is uncomfortable, but it is honest, and I have decided that honest is how I want to live whatever comes next. The oak tree Robert planted in the backyard in 1995 is still standing. I can see it from the sunroom window. Some mornings I sit there with my coffee before the house wakes up, and I just look at it. That's enough. Most days, that's enough. Looking back at everything that happened in those 4 days, I keep coming back to one thing. Not the documents, not the frozen accounts, not even Oliver's face when I said sit down at that podium and he sat. I keep coming back to Carol, standing at her desk, watching the elevator doors close behind my son and a man she'd never met, and deciding that what she saw was her business after all. That's where it started. Not with a lawsuit, not with a forensic accountant, not with 31 years of compliance experience. It started with one person who chose not to look away. I think about that a lot when people ask me what I learned from all of this. Because the easy answer is that I learned to read the fine print, to question the paperwork that arrives described as routine, to notice when the people closest to you are asking questions that feel more like measurements. And all of that is true. I learned all of it. But the harder lesson is about what we owe each other, not in a grand, abstract sense. In the small, daily sense. Carol could have told herself she'd misread the situation. She could have told herself it would sort itself out. She could have let me walk past reception and into that elevator and said nothing, and I would never have known she'd made a choice. That's the thing about looking away. It's invisible. Nobody sees you do it. She chose to be seen anyway. And I think that is the thing that takes the most courage in any life. Not the dramatic stand. Not the public moment at the podium with the evidence on the screen and the officers waiting by the door. Those things take nerve, and I'm glad I had it. But nerve in a crisis is something you can summon. It's an emergency resource. Most of us find it when we have to. What Carol did was quieter than that, and harder. She held my wrist in a lobby on an ordinary Tuesday and said, please, without any guarantee that she was right, without any certainty that I'd listen, without knowing how it would end. She just decided that silence was worse than speaking. I spent 31 years teaching compliance. I told people, professionally for 3 decades, that fraud survives in silence. I believed it. I built a career on it. And then I almost became a case study in my own lecture because the fraud was wearing my son's face, and I had trained myself the way every parent trains themselves, not to see clearly when the person in front of me was someone I loved. That's the thing Oliver was counting on. And he wasn't wrong to count on it. Love does make you slow. It makes you generous in your interpretations and charitable with your doubts and patient when you should be skeptical. That's not a flaw. That's what love is. But it means you need people around you who are not compromised by the same love. You need a Carol who has no reason to protect you except that she decided to. You need a Bay who will sit at your kitchen table with reading glasses and a legal pad and tell you the truth about what page 9 actually says. Oliver made choices that I still don't fully understand, even after the letter, even after all of it. I think he told himself a story in which he was helping. I think most people who take from others tell themselves some version of that story. It doesn't make the taking less real. It just makes it sadder and more human and harder to hold. What I know is this: the house is still mine. The accounts are mine, and I am 63 years old, which is not old, no matter what the paperwork implied. The people who decided I was past managing my own life were wrong, and the people who decided to stand with me, Carol, Bea, Harriet, James, a retired colleague who stood up at a party and said the compliance division is with you, they were right. You cannot protect yourself from everyone. But you can be the kind of person who, when you see something, says something. You can be Carol. You can refuse to let looking away be invisible. That's all I have. That and the oak tree Robert planted and the sunroom window, and enough coffee to get through most mornings. It's enough.